Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're really getting our hands dirty with a topic that's, well, let's be honest, not always the most glamorous. We're talking about waste. All this stuff we toss out every single day.
Definitely not a beach vacation topic, right?
Exactly. But it's something that affects each and every one of us, whether we realize it or not.
Absolutely. And it's way more complex than you might think.
Right. I mean, we all know we should recycle and try to reduce our trash. But there's a whole world of information out there about waste management and its impact on, well, everything.
It really is a global issue with some serious consequences.
For this deep dive, we're going to be unpacking a pretty comprehensive training module on waste reduction and recycling. And let me tell you, it's eye-opening stuff.
Yeah, it really gets into the nitty-gritty of the waste challenge, from the sheer volume of trash we produce to its impact on the environment and even the economy.
Our mission, if you will, is to help you understand just how big this problem is, but also, and this is important, to explore some of the incredible solutions that are being developed and implemented all over the world.
Because there is hope.
Lots of it, actually. But first, we have to face the not-so-pretty reality.
Right. We can't sugarcoat it.
So let's just dive right in, shall we? And what better way to start than with a mind-blowing statistic? Ready for this? Humanity generates over 2.24 billion tons of waste every single year.
Every single year.
Yeah. Think about that for a second.
Pretty hard to even visualize, right?
It is. So the module actually gives us this helpful comparison. Imagine 380 Great Pyramids of Giza.
Wow.
Yeah. Now imagine all those pyramids, not made of stone, but of trash.
That's just,
Yeah.
like, where does it all go?
Right. And it's not just the sheer quantity, it's what that waste is made of. We're talking different materials, different decomposition rates, different levels of toxicity. Oh, yeah. And the training module breaks it down really well, actually. So the biggest chunk, coming in at about 44%, is organic waste. Things like food scraps, yard waste, stuff that breaks down naturally, right?
Right. But there's a catch.
Always a catch.
Even though it decomposes, if it ends up in a landfill, it doesn't just disappear.
It doesn't.
Nope. As it breaks down in that environment, it actually releases methane.
Methane, like the greenhouse gas.
The one and only. And methane, for all you non-scientists out there, is even more potent than carbon dioxide when it comes to trapping heat in the atmosphere.
So even our banana peels and coffee grounds are contributing to the climate crisis.
In a way, yes. It's all part of a bigger system.
Okay, so that's organic waste. What about the other stuff? The things that don't break down so easily.
Ah, yes. The villains of the waste world.
And the poster child for that category has got to be plastic, right?
Oh, definitely. It's the ultimate symbol of our throwaway culture.
The module says that plastic makes up about 12% of global waste. And get this, some plastics can take up to 450 years to decompose.
450 years.
I know. It's crazy to think that if some future civilization were to dig up our landfills, they'd be finding our water bottles and plastic bags perfectly preserved. It's almost like we're leaving our trash as a legacy.
A rather unfortunate legacy.
Yeah.
And it's not just landfills. Waste has infiltrated even the most remote corners of our planet. Ever heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch?
Oh, yeah. That's the giant swirling mass of plastic in the ocean, right?
Exactly. It's 3 times the size of France.
3 times the size of France.
Yeah.
Wow.
And even Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth, is covered in trash. Over 10 tons of it, in fact.
So it's like we've managed to pollute the entire planet. Land, sea, even the highest peaks.
We've even managed to pollute space.
Space. Really?
There's currently over 8,000 tons of debris from old satellites and rockets orbiting Earth. It's a hazard to future space exploration.
That's just, it really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? We think of throwing something away, but there's no away. It all goes somewhere.
Precisely. And all this waste, it's not just an eyesore. It's impacting our environment, our health, and even our wallets.
Right. Because, let's face it, getting rid of all this trash, it costs money.
A lot of money. Globally, waste management costs exceed $2 trillion annually. And that's not even taking into account the environmental and health damages that are much harder to quantify.
So we're paying a hefty price for all this waste. It makes you wonder if we can actually afford to keep doing things the way we are.
It's a question we have to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
But before we get into possible solutions, let's dig a little deeper into how all this waste is impacting what's often called the triple planetary crisis. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution.
Right. It's all connected. We talked about landfills releasing methane, but there are other ways waste contributes to climate change. Like, what about burning trash? I know that still happens in many parts of the world.
Absolutely. Open waste burning is a major problem. It releases black carbon, which is another potent contributor to climate change.
And I think I read somewhere that black carbon also speeds up the melting of glaciers and ice caps.
You're right. It's a double whammy for the climate.
So not only are we creating this mountain of trash, but it's actively making the problem worse in the long run.
It's a vicious cycle, and it doesn't stop there. Waste kills wildlife, contaminates our soil and water, and spreads diseases.
The module mentioned that between 400,000 and 1 million people die every year from diseases linked to mismanaged waste.
It's a stark reminder of the human cost of this issue. And then there's hazardous waste, which adds another layer of complexity.
Hazardous waste.
Things like e-waste from electronics, medical waste, batteries. These contain toxic chemicals that can leach into the environment and cause serious harm if not handled properly.
It definitely makes you think twice about just tossing that old phone in the trash. Speaking of things we toss in the trash, I think we need to talk about fast fashion. It seems like that industry is a major contributor to the waste problem.
You're absolutely right. The fashion industry is responsible for a shocking 10% of global CO2 emissions.
10%.
Yeah, and it uses a massive amount of water, about 93 billion cubic meters annually.
That's insane.
To put that in perspective, just one cotton t-shirt requires 2,700 liters of water to produce. That's enough drinking water for one person for 900 days.
That's mind-boggling. So what happens to all those clothes when we're done with them?
Well, unfortunately, only about 12% of clothes are actually recycled each year. The rest end up in landfills or are incinerated, creating more waste and pollution.
Wow. This whole conversation's been pretty doom and gloom so far.
I know, right? But don't worry, it's not all bad news. There are some incredibly inspiring initiatives happening around the world to tackle this waste challenge head-on.
Okay, good. Because I'm ready for some good news.
Well, let's start with a trip to Japan, shall we? There's a village there called Kamikatsu that has become a model for zero-waste living.
Kamikatsu. I've heard about them. They have like a zillion different recycling categories, right?
They have 45, to be exact.
45. Wow.
It requires a lot of effort from the residents, but
Yeah.
it's resulted in them achieving near-zero waste output.
That's incredible. I mean, just imagine if every community was that dedicated to reducing their waste.
It's a powerful example of what's possible when people come together and commit to a shared goal. Speaking of innovative waste management, Sweden also offers a compelling example.
Sweden.
Yeah, Sweden.
Oh, they're amazing.
I've always heard they're, like, way ahead of the game when it comes to, sustainability and all that.
Oh, absolutely. They've really embraced this idea of a circular economy where resources are like constantly being reused and recycled.
So it's not just about recycling, it's about like designing things from the start so they could be recycled. Exactly. And they've also invested heavily in recycling infrastructure and have these really cool waste-to-energy plants.
Waste to energy.
Yeah, they basically burn the trash and use the heat to generate electricity.
So they're turning trash into power.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
And because of all this, less than 1% of their household waste ends up in landfills.
That's crazy impressive. It
Yeah.
makes our landfills look, well,
Yeah.
I even heard that they actually import trash from other countries to keep these plants running.
That's true. They have such a good system that they have the capacity to process even more waste.
Wow, that's commitment. But it's not just about the technology, right? It seems like there's also this cultural shift happening in Sweden.
Oh, for sure. There's a strong sense of like environmental responsibility there. People are really invested in sorting their waste properly and just generally reducing their consumption.
So it's like it's become a way of life.
Exactly. It's really inspiring to see.
It really is. But okay, let's be honest. Achieving that level of sustainability here, I mean, it can feel kind of daunting.
You know what you mean?
Especially when, some places are still struggling with even basic waste management. Are there any bright spots, though, like in developing countries, places that don't necessarily have all those resources?
Definitely. Our training module actually highlights some really innovative solutions that are happening in developing countries. And they're not just addressing waste, they're also addressing poverty at the same time.
Oh, wow, that's great. Like what?
Have you heard of Plastic Bank?
Plastic Bank.
Yeah, they operate in places like the Philippines and Haiti, where plastic pollution is a really big problem.
I see. And what do they do exactly?
Well, they've created this system where people can collect plastic waste and then exchange it for cash or goods or even services.
So they're basically incentivizing recycling.
Yeah, but it's also providing economic opportunities for these communities.
Wow, I love that. It's like a win-win situation.
Exactly. And then the collected plastic is recycled and gets reintroduced into the supply chain, which also helps reduce the need for new plastic production.
Oh, that's brilliant. They're tackling multiple problems at the same time. Are there any other examples like that?
Whoa, tons.
Hmm.
Think about, like, waste pickers. You know, those folks who collect recyclable materials from, like, the streets and landfills.
Right.
They often work in really tough conditions and face a lot of stigma.
Yeah, it's not exactly a glamorous job.
But in cities like Bogota and Pune, waste pickers are actually forming cooperatives.
Cooperatives?
Yeah, they're coming together to, like, improve their working conditions and also advocate for their rights.
So they're getting organized.
Exactly. And these cooperatives, they're not just helping the waste pickers themselves, they're also playing a vital role in the city's waste management system.
That's awesome. So they're cleaning up our waste, but also gaining economic empowerment in the process.
Precisely. It's a win-win for everyone involved.
It's like those folks are often overlooked, but they're actually providing a really valuable service.
Absolutely.
So we've got these like top-down initiatives happening in Japan and Sweden, and then we've got these amazing grassroots movements in developing countries. What about here? Are there any cool solutions popping up in North America?
Oh, totally. The Green Bronx Machine in New York City is a really cool example.
Oh, I've heard of them. Are they like growing food or something?
Yeah. They've combined waste reduction, composting, and urban farming into this, like, really amazing sustainable food system. And it's all happening in the South Bronx.
Wait, so they're growing food with compost made from waste?
Exactly. They've transformed school cafeterias and these vacant lots into, like, vibrant urban farms.
So it's not just about sustainability, it's also about like community development and education.
Exactly. It's a really holistic approach.
Yeah.
And they're teaching kids about healthy eating and environmental stewardship.
I love it. That's so cool. Okay, and I remember reading about something called eco bricks in the training materials.
Oh, yeah. Eco bricks.
Aren't those like plastic bottles stuffed with non-recyclable plastic?
Yes. It's such a simple idea, but it's actually a really effective way to repurpose plastic waste that would otherwise end up in a landfill.
And I read that communities in like South Africa and Southeast Asia are actually using them as building materials.
Yeah, it's amazing. They're building homes, schools, all sorts of structures with these eco bricks.
It's like turning trash into building blocks.
I know, it's so cool. It reminds me of that documentary, Garbage Warrior, about that architect who builds those earth ships.
Oh yeah, Earth Ships. I love that documentary. It's so inspiring.
Yeah, those homes are totally off the grid. Like, they use solar panels and wind turbines for energy, and they even have systems for collecting rainwater and reusing gray water.
It's like they've thought of everything.
I know. It's a really holistic approach to sustainable living. And speaking of documentaries, the training module also recommends The Story of Stuff. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, that one's a classic. It really makes you think about our whole consumption culture and, how it drives so much of this waste problem in the first place.
For sure. It's a real eye-opener.
Okay, so we've journeyed around the world, right? We've looked at all these inspiring solutions from high-tech waste management to community-driven initiatives to these incredible examples of eco-conscious architecture. And it's clear that there's a lot of innovation happening, but I gotta say, I'm also feeling a little overwhelmed. Like, where do we even begin?
I hear you. It can feel like a really big, complicated issue.
Right. So, what can we actually do as individuals to make a difference?
Well, that's where the 6 R's of sustainability come in.
Oh, yeah. The 6 R's.
It's a framework that provides, like, a practical roadmap for reducing our waste footprint.
Rethink, refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, and recover. I mean, the concept is pretty straightforward, but how do we actually put those principles into practice, like in our everyday lives?
Okay, so the first step is really about, like, shifting our mindset, being more mindful of our consumption habits. Like, rethink encourages us to, really question our needs and to choose products and services that are more sustainable.
I like that. So it's about thinking before we buy.
Exactly. And then refuse is about saying no to unnecessary items, especially those, like, single-use plastics.
Like those plastic straws.
Exactly. And then reduce, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's
Yeah.
about minimizing the amount of waste we generate in the first place.
So it's like before we even get to the recycling stage, we need to change our habits upstream.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is about changing our mindset before we even get to the actual, like, disposal part of things.
It's like this whole conversation about waste. It's not just about sorting our trash properly or whatever.
Right.
It's really about something much bigger.
Yeah, it's about, like, our values. Right.
Totally. What do we prioritize as a society? What kind of world do we want to leave for future generations?
It's deep stuff.
It is. And I think for a long time, our relationship with stuff, with consumption has been kind of messed up, right?
Yeah, we've been operating under this, like, take, make, dispose model for way too long.
And we haven't really stopped to consider the consequences.
But the good news is things are starting to change.
They are.
Yeah, there's this growing awareness that we can't keep operating this way, and there's more and more talk about, like, the circular economy.
The circular economy.
Where resources are reused and recycled as much as possible, so it's like a closed-loop system.
Oh, I see. It's like, instead of just throwing things away, we're finding ways to, like, keep them in the system.
Exactly, and it's gaining a lot of traction.
That's great, because it's like, we're finally realizing that, there is no away when it comes to waste.
Right, it all ends up somewhere.
And it all comes back to affect us in some way.
Absolutely.
And it's not just like big corporations or governments that need to change, right? I mean, what about us, like regular folks?
Our choices matter too.
Do they really?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it's easy to feel like, one person's actions aren't going to make a difference.
But I really believe that every little bit helps.
Like what? Give me some example.
Okay, so like bringing your own reusable bags to the grocery store instead of using plastic ones.
Okay, I can do that.
Or like repairing something that's broken instead of just throwing it away and buying a new one.
Right, make it last.
Exactly. Or even just like being more conscious of the packaging when you're shopping. Choosing products with less packaging or packaging that can be recycled.
It's like all those little things add up.
Exactly.
And, speaking of things that add up, what about composting?
Composting is awesome.
Right. I mean, it seems so simple, but it's like we're taking our food scraps and turning them into something useful.
Yeah, it's like closing the loop. Right.
Yeah.
You're taking those organic materials and turning them back into nutrient-rich soil.
Which can then be used to grow more food.
Exactly.
I love it. It's like this beautiful cycle.
It is.
And it's something that anyone can do, even if you live in an apartment, right?
Yeah, there are all sorts of indoor composting systems nowadays.
That's so cool. Okay, so we've got all these amazing solutions, and we've talked about, like, shifting our mindset. But I think it's also important to remember that we don't have to be perfect, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
I mean, it's easy to get overwhelmed by all this information and feel like we need to do everything perfectly all the time.
It's a journey, not a destination, right?
Totally. Like, start with 1 or 2 changes that feel manageable for you, and then build from there.
Exactly. And don't beat yourself up if you, like, slip up sometimes.
We all do.
It's about progress, not perfection.
And I think, having these conversations like the one we're having right now is so important.
Absolutely.
Because the more we talk about these issues, the more aware we become, and the more likely we are to actually make changes in our own lives.
Right. And we can inspire others to do the same.
Like those documentaries we mentioned, they sparked some really important conversations, and that's something we can all do, right?
Totally. Share what you've learned. Start discussions with your friends and family. Get involved in your community.
It's about creating those ripples, right? Like spreading the word and inspiring others to take action. And even though it can feel overwhelming at times, I think it's important to remember that we're not alone in this.
For sure.
There are so many people and organizations out there who are working towards a more sustainable future.
Absolutely. There's a whole movement happening.
And by connecting with others, sharing ideas, supporting each other, we can amplify those efforts and really make a difference.
I love that. It's like we're all part of this collective effort to create a better world.
Exactly. It's like we may not have all the answers, but we can figure it out together.
I love that energy.
Me too. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of waste, I want to leave you with this question. What one action will you take to reduce your impact? Will you commit to bringing your own reusable bags to the store? Will you start composting? Will you try to buy less stuff?
Every little bit helps.
Seriously, every step we take, no matter how small, it moves us closer to a world where waste is not a problem to be managed, but a valuable resource to be harnessed.
I love that vision.
Me too. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Thanks for having me.
It's been real.
It has.